Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
You're listening to Attitude's ADHD Experts, and I'm Susan Kaufman here for Attitude Magazine. Today we're talking about young adults. Adulthood is the challenge for anyone these days, and for young adults with ADHD or ADD, the transition is especially difficult. From choosing the right job to living on one's own, from managing finances to making friends, young adults face organizational and motivation problems that can seem pretty overwhelming. Our guest today is Wes Crenshaw, Ph.D. He is a board-certified psychologist based in the greater Kansas City area. Thank you so much, Dr. Crenshaw, known as Dr. Wes, for being with us.
Great to be here.
Since beginning practice in 1992, Dr. Wes has specialized in adolescent psychology. He's worked with literally hundreds of teens, preteens, young adults, and their parents. He has extensive training and experience in adolescent mood disorders and dating, sexuality, attention deficit disorder, school issues, and behavior management. He is the author of a new book, which I really want to recommend to all of you, called I Always Want to Be Where I'm Not, Successful Living with ADD and ADHD. It was published in May. It's a practical book with advice for young adults and their parents based around principles for successful living, including making decisions, taking responsibility, and lots more. He also hosts monthly radio shows that are available as podcasts. You can learn more about his work and find links to his book and audio podcast at his website, which is www.dr-wes.com. Dr. Wes, over to you. Thank you again for being here today. We're so happy to have you.
Well, it's nice to be here, Susan. Thank you. And I should probably warn everybody, if they can't hear me because they hear a crashing noise, that will be my office cat knocking over the mic stand. I don't know why she's become obsessed with it in here, but if she gets too naughty, we'll run her to the waiting room. So if you want to see her picture, that's on my website, too. She looks very noble in that picture. You can trust me when I say that she is not noble. So it really is an honor to speak to this group today. I have great respect for Attitude Magazine and the mission that it has for educating the public and being supportive of people with ADD. I think it's a great publication. So I want to take a moment to introduce myself and some of what I do to sort of lay out a platform for the topic today, which is a game plan for late teens and young adults with ADD. And I do, by the way, stick to the old diagnostic label because, as all of you are quite aware, the vast majority of people with ADD don't have hyperactivity, and I think the official label of ADHD obscures that fact. It's just the worst branding since New Coke, I swear. And if you're not old enough to remember New Coke, read about it. The worst branding in history next to ADHD. So, I used to actually be one of the skeptics about ADD back in the 1990s, and then I ended up somehow with two of my own kids who have ADD and several hundred clients and thousands of hours of contact with those clients. And the vast majority of these folks, including my own kids, were just really responding better to treatments for ADD than any alternative explanation. Even when they had other problems like trauma or child abuse or learning disabilities, they were still doing better when we were treating those symptoms. So I sort of gave up my illusions at that point of the big mental health, big pharma industrial complex and started focusing on what really matters, which is helping young people get onto a better life. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. And over 14 years of operating in that model, I have kind of come to realize that there is no more important phase in a ADD person or even a non-ADD person's life than that time between 16 and 24 when he or she are establishing character, career, substance use patterns, relationships, dating relationships, family dynamics, reproduction, and earning potential, just the overall relationship to society. And one can overcome obstacles created during this phase of life, of course, as they grow up and move through adulthood, but it can take a long time, and occasionally it can take the rest of your life to clean up some of those problems. So these years matter a lot, and whether you are the young person in that age group or the parent, it pays to do the most intentional, most deliberative planning you can. And I wrote the book that Susan talked about, I Always Want to Be Where I'm Not, Successful Living with ADD and ADHD, with that age group in mind, and really as an adjunct not a replacement for treatment, to kind of get people organized into what's the best way to respond. And most of what I'm going to talk about today actually isn't in the book, but it does come, today's material comes from thousands of hours of conversations with ADD clients and families, and it really reflects what I found works best at this time of life. So I'm going to give you a little overview, and then please fire up your questions, because I'm always interested in what you have to say and what you're interested in, and we'll tailor what we talk about today to your concerns. So I always, without fail, will talk to ADD clients in a first session. How are you planning for the future, or what is your plan? And even if they're like 10 years old, that is my question, because it's that important. So if we'll go on to the first slide, in looking ahead to adulthood, I found that young people fall into about 3 categories. And in order to test this, I've been asking my clients lately which one they think they fall into, and they can usually identify it. And they're either the overly optimistic, the terrified, or the lost. And each one of these has its own benefit and its challenge. And each one of these is really mediated by anxiety more than it is by ADD. The overly optimistic people are the ones who have no anxiety. They're not worried enough. And what the research tells us is there's a curvilinear relationship between anxiety and productivity. So if you have too much anxiety, you're going to not do well. And if you have too little anxiety, you're going to not do well. Where you want to be is at just the right amount of worry. And the over-optimistic teens are just a little too ready to get out there and, throw the parents under the bus and live their lives. And when you really ask them how you're going to pay for that, they often have very unrealistic expectations of what it means to be independent. They're very excited about freedom, and what they don't fully understand is that freedom isn't free. It's really kind of expensive. And with these folks, I remember something my dad used to say, and I didn't realize he stole it from Mother Jones, but he used to say, my job as a minister, he was a United Methodist minister, my job as a minister is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And that really is kind of what you have to do with working with the optimistic teens. They're a little too comfortable. You have to afflict them. You have to help them understand all of the many myriad problems that you're going to face as a young adult without scaring them to death, which of course brings us to the second set of teens, the terrified teens. And they lean in exactly the opposite direction. They tend to have more anxiety in their fear of what ADD does to them in their young adult lives than is helpful. So they will be the ones who, when they're 12 years old, are worrying that they're not going to be able to succeed, that they can't pass a test, that they won't be able to go to a college, and you're thinking, you just need to worry about 7th grade. These are the teens that you have to comfort. They're the afflicted ones, and you have to say, if you will follow these plans, and we're going to talk about specifically in a minute what I mean, then it's going to come out okay. Just get on the team, bear with me, it's going to be all right. So the third category are the lost teens, and they are a unique group, and there are plenty of them. And these are the folks who lack the energy of anxiety and easily become depressed and defeated, but they don't have the optimism that goes along with the sort of overly optimistic ones. And this is what's tricky, because do you comfort them? Do you afflict them? How do you work? And it's a very tight needle that you're constantly having to thread. And so your affliction of them, your reminder of them that here are the difficult things coming up, has to be done very gently. I literally walked out of one of these sessions just before I did the webinar today, and I would say to her, you got to get up and do what needs to be done here. Do you understand? And then you would see this look of terror in her eyes. And so the goal here is to not scare the lost teens to death, but likewise to keep moving them forward on a realistic plan. So before we get into the specifics of that, I want to talk a minute about hope. People do not fully appreciate the importance of hope. And hope in psychology is not an abstract idea. It's a very specific psychological construct. And if you want to read some good literature about that, I talk about it in my book quite a bit, but there's also books by C.R. Snyder, who's a psychologist at the University of Kansas, and one of his students, Shane Lopez, just recently released a book about hope. And they're not specific to ADD at all. In fact, I don't think they mention it. But the idea is that hope is made up of two constructs, the will and the way. And the way is the plan, is the seeing the goal, and the will is the belief in yourself to get there. And one of the catches in this, now we're back to Dr. Wes-isms here, one of the catches in all this is that people with ADD don't want the way that the rest of us do. They don't want in a deliberative, intentional way. It's more like a wish. And learning to be hopeful, to have a plan and a sense of efficacy, self-efficacy is what we call the will, to get up and do it is about wanting effectively, not wishing. And I go into this in great detail in the book, but for now, just understand the goal is to have a hopeful view. Now, you might say, those optimistic people, aren't they already kind of a little too hopeful? No, optimism isn't necessarily based on realism. Hope is. Hope is a realistic goal and a realistic way to get there. So here are some ways to get very specific things. None of these, to get to that hopeful position, none of these are shocking news flashes, I assure you. But what's important is teaching young people to get up every day and do these things like a ritual, like a habit, like a mantra. And not that they're such shocking ideas, but it's the learning to discipline yourself to do them. So we have some pretty common faves here. Brainstorming. I am a big believer in mentors. Some of you will use the term a coach. Nothing wrong with that. I have some young people who have agreed to coach other young people because they're pretty good peer age coaches. And they've mastered my principles, or my 13 principles from the book, or they're pretty close to it. And they're really good at working with other young people to not just tutor them in specifics of the discipline, but in this mentoring idea, this idea of how to be successful. And one of the things a mentor can do is listen to your ideas and help you decide whether they're valid or not. Now, this is so hard on people's ego, and it makes people feel sad sometimes. If somebody says, I'm going to be the best video game designer in the world, or I'm going to play for the NBA and I'm 5'10", having to say to somebody, let's think of some additional ideas, is sometimes very hard to hear and hard to do. But a mentor, because they are known to be benevolent, the mentor has your best interest at heart, that you learn to trust that person so they see things that you're not seeing. They see what's around the corner and help you decide how to respond to it. The next one is determining, and it kind of goes with the brainstorming, determining if the goal is attainable. Is it achievable? This is, again, it can be hard on the ego, but I do this every day. I did it today. I did it yesterday. I did it last week. Is this going to work? In the case today, we were talking about what can the young person afford and what kind of job do they need to have to afford it. And this is a person who's just graduated from college. Can you afford the goal of an apartment in this certain city, in this certain situation? Can you wait until January to start a job, or do you need to work full-time now until graduate school starts? What is doable? The next one is the cost-benefit analysis, and I actually do this numerically, where you sit down and put a weight on, like weighing on each of the items and in your list of pros and cons. So living in, going to, let's pick college. Living in the dorm cost might be a -4. Meeting new people might be a +5. Getting away from your parents, that's always a +10, I'm sure young people feel. But having to, risk being in the social milieu that keeps you maybe from studying, that's probably a -6. You kind of lay all those out, add them all up, and the numbers, if you do it honestly with a mentor, rarely lie. That's just a really good way to make your cost-benefit analysis a little more robust, because not all pros and cons are created equal. Making authentic choices. I talk about this a lot in the book. Anybody can make a choice, but if that choice isn't made against a valid counter choice, it's not an authentic choice. For lack of a better example off the top of my head, divorce and marriage is as good a one as you can think of. People cannot be married without the authentic choice to be divorced. And if you'll think that through a little, it'll make sense. I've been married for like ever, 30 years. And every day I have to choose to be married. I have to get up and decide to be married because I can allow myself to believe divorce is an option. If you just go to college, for example, because your parents say you should go to college, that isn't an authentic choice. And one of the things we do with young adults at this age is to sit down and say, what are the menu of options? And if you don't really look at all of what's possible, then you can't choose from a true authentic list. That said, one can also imagine too many choices. One of the things I run into in working with folks with ADD is many of them come in and they have this whole long list of choices, only 2 or 3 of which are really authentic choices. Or the worst example is there's yes, no, and then there's maybe. And of course maybe wins every time, because maybe is a lot easier than having to firmly adhere yourself to yes or no. The truth of the matter is most decisions are really binary, and it's either yes or no, and it may be a series of those decisions, but you have to make them yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. I talk about that in the book. You want to get rid of 2 words from your vocabulary, and Yoda said it better than anyone: do or do not, there is no try. And if you don't get rid of try, well, I tried to do that, well, I want to do that, most of your schemes are going to end up with didn't. And you'd be really surprised if once you get people to do this, how much better it is for their decision making. I'll have people come in and they'll be like, well, I tried that, and then they look at me like they swallowed a rat, and they said, I didn't really mean that. What I meant is I'm going to do it. Do know your limits. It's very easy to take on too many things, too many hours at work, too much school, too much social time, and for heaven's sakes, too many video games. You get too much of that going on and you can't sort anything out. And that just sets you up to fail. So even if all of your choices, all of the things you're wanting to do are good, positive things, it's very possible to do too many of them. And only when you know what your limits are can you push those limits. It's okay to push a little farther than what you think you can do, but the mistake comes in pushing so far that you can't do anything. It's sort of like you try to carry too many groceries in, so you only have to make one trip, and you drop them all on the stairs. Life is like that commonly. Pace yourself. One of the things, it's always a trick in working with young adults, is figuring out how to take breaks from things without falling off the goal. And usually if you can pick short-term objectives, and that can be, the best one every day, the most important organizational task anyone will do is getting out of bed. That's a goal. And if you can get out of bed every day at the correct time, you should reward yourself. That one will wipe you out faster than any other objective for the day. And then when you need to take a break from something, you do some sort of little task like take a shower or read a few pages in a book, and stay away from those dangerous things like starting a video game or watching a movie that really take you away from the break. But being able to do little things in short spurts will always win the day over the big, glorious, I have to do 20 things today. One of my favorites, I'm not really a very big substance abuse fan. Everybody who sees me knows that, and we just kind of live with one another's differences about that. But no matter what your views on drug and alcohol use, I guarantee you substance abuse does not promote good choices. When you're making life-altering decisions, particularly about dating, that one seems to be a problem, you got to make those decisions when you're not altered. Partying is partying, and decision-making is decision-making, and never the twain shall meet. I think it's important on the next slide, you want to know when you're successful and take a little picture of it or tweet about it or whatever, sing your praises, because it's no small task when you do something cool. And you want to always remember that. You always want to commemorate that so that it drives you on to the next success. Now, sure, you want to remember your mistakes too, because that gives you what's called cognitive override. It helps you to think, I remember this and it didn't work out very well. But that's easier sometimes than remembering what you do well and feeling good about it. And so anytime, and I mean, I don't care if you're having trouble getting up in the morning, take a picture of getting out of bed every morning and be proud of yourself. Whatever the goal is, celebrate it. All right, we're at question time. I'm excited.
Great. Thanks so much. I thought that your description of the 3 types of teens was fascinating. I think we've all seen kids who fall into one of your categories, the optimistic, the overly optimistic ones, and then the terrified ones being sort of the common ones. We have a number of people on the webinar whose kids would fall more in the terrified category, I think.
Yeah.
Any specific thoughts for those parents?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of different thoughts about it. They all have their own little unique problem. The ones who are too optimistic will go off and get in a lot more trouble than the terrified ones will, because the terrified ones don't go up and try these things. One of the problems with the current group of terrified ones, and I bet people have run into this, is they don't learn to drive. You have to, just using this as but one example, and it's very difficult to make a person learn to drive, and they have lots of good reasons for it. They feel uncomfortable on the road. They're afraid they'll have an accident. So you really have to incentivize things like that and say, you can do it 2 ways. One of the kids I saw the other day, the parent said, you will just have to walk everywhere. You'll have to walk to the bus. We're not going to take you places. You're 17. You're going to have to learn how to do this. And finally, she gave in and did that. In other cases, people may have to put financial incentives on it. I'm a big believer in providing those kind of incentives. I don't do token economies in my home. I just use the regular economy, and that motivates people to, we all know how much $50 is worth, So wherever the price point is, if you think something is an important goal, whether it's studying for the ACT or driving or, getting a job, whether you need to put a positive incentive by paying somebody or a negative incentive by taking away money or the car, that's okay to do. It's motivation is different for every kid. And if you have kids that are so terrified of the future that they're kind of avoiding it, I think it's time to go to a therapist or a coach and sit down and really start talking about what's the one small thing we can do this week. And this will work as they do one small thing this week and they do another small thing the next week. And what's really funny, I pulled this one on a client a few weeks ago, and I told her, just go home and fill out the FAFSA. Don't do anything else. I know that's hard. Just do that. And I started getting texts every hour. Well, I started the FAFSA. And then an hour later, I finished it. And an hour later, I went ahead and applied to the college. And an hour later, I submitted my essays. And I thought, how did that happen? Even I was surprised. And what happens is she did exactly this idea of the tiny little step. Well, when she finished the step, she was so excited, she did the next step. And she came in, she'd done everything I thought it was going to take her a month to do in like a weekend. So
wow.
Try and downplay the scary part and just say, go sign up for the FAFSA. Go sign up for the ACT. We'll worry about the rest of it another day. And sometimes that'll get people primed. And, and that example is one of the best ones I have. I'm not going to say that happens every time, but they can go in and do just the little part you've agreed to do. Try to make things look smaller than they are for the scared people.
Okay. I mean, you named a couple of really interesting markers, learn to drive, get the first job. There are a number of people who were asking, what should be their list of goals for, these are parents who are asking for their high school or recent college grad, what is the list of things that they should try to motivate their children to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. And of course, with the caveat that every child deserves their own parenting manual, because each one is sort of individual. overriding, you have to come up with about 3 and just stick to the 3. And honestly, I'm not a very big fan of clean rooms being one of them. I think, that's one that just comes in the door all the time, and here the person is failing out of school and they're worried about the fact that their underwear is hanging from the doorknob. I agree that messy rooms are annoying, but rarely should that be one of the top 3. So study time is probably incontrovertible. People will, if your son or daughter comes home and you ask them, do you have any homework? The likely response to that is going to be about like if you say, are you having sex with that person I hate? They're probably not going to tell you the truth. What works better is to just say every day we have a number of minutes for study time equal to the grade level of the kids. So if they're in 8th grade, that's 80 minutes. And have them do that. If they do it 4 days a week, then let them off for the 5th day. And if they don't have, quote, homework, then you give them enrichment materials for that 80 minutes. And I don't mean to punish them because people need to study the SAT words or whatever. And I guarantee you very quickly, I've done it many times, very quickly kids will stop forgetting homework because they don't want to learn 5,000 ACT words or SAT words and start working on the homework because the 80 minutes is set aside. And if you start doing this when they're in 4th grade and it's 40 minutes and they have that time set aside every day, they start to think that's the way everything operates. And they will get in there and be more in alignment. Now, I'm not going to say that's the great panacea, but it has worked infinitely better than the, do you have homework tonight? No, I'm off to play Call of Duty. So that's just one example of a hard and fast guideline you can focus on. I think effort is infinitely more important than grades, even though that doesn't pay off on the scholarships. If you see your kid putting in the 80 minutes and they still get a C, I would be proud of them for the 80 minutes. I would focus on they've achieved that goal, hang in there, keep trying. Another one that people have to focus on is this future orientation of what am I going to do after high school. Honestly, we have way too many people going to college in this country. If we didn't, it wouldn't be a 46% rate of people who start and don't graduate in 7 years. It's good to talk about a gap year as long as the gap year isn't couch surfing, playing video, or watching Netflix. That's good to think of AmeriCorps or some kind of job that benefits the person and gives them work experience, but is not putting them into college. A lot of people are not ready to go at 18 or 19. In fact, I would say a majority are not. So thinking about creatively, what can we do in that transitional period and having kids research that and spend some time thinking about it. That helps with the lost people because it gives them a natural connection to some of these things. Relationships. I am getting certified in sex therapy through the University of Michigan because I've clearly come to understand how important that is in this time of people's lives. And I think I'm writing a book called Consent-Based Sex Education because I think parents really need to work, particularly with ADD kids who are not maybe always going to make the best choices in the moment, work with them on not how do you say no to sex, because I talk to these kids and that's not what they're interested in, but how do you say yes to sex in a way that's ethical, safe, intelligent. And being able to have those conversations and expecting your kids to act ethically towards others, not only sexually, but in other relationships, that's got to be a pretty high priority. So those are generally three things I think that are usually worth working on. But if your kid has mastered one of those, there are kids that do study the 80 minutes a night, then there's going to be another one that you can probably find. But when people get 5 or 6 goals going, nobody can keep track of that, and it's hard to stay focused on the important ones.
That's really helpful. I mean, there are a number of parents who are asking, when are they over-involved? What parents, I think we see this a lot of attitudes struggle with whether they're enabling by helping a child, and yet you're describing a parental role which is quite clear in terms of setting expectations around 1 or 2 or 3 goals.
Yeah.
So can you talk a bit about that? How involved should parents be in helping their children make and reach independence?
That is such a good question. They have to be fairly involved. I am actually not that thrilled with the anti-helicopter parent situation. The anxious kids need less structure and less parent involvement, and the ADD kids need more. That's just logical. The ADD people don't care enough, and the anxious people care too much. And I don't mean morally. I just mean in terms of what they focus on. And so parents have to be more clear, more consistent, and more involved with the ADD kids than with any other kid. Now, how to be involved becomes the question. And on one hand, if you follow the kid around all the time and do everything for them, that is enabling inherently. Because, like, for instance, if you're cleaning their room, I promise you, if you stop cleaning their room, they're not going to start. That's not what happens. But if you're doing it, that's enabling them to be dependent on you. And this is where parents have to ask themselves every day, am I enabling or am I being beneficent? And every parent I work with of anyone 17 and up at least, we have this conversation. And being beneficent means helping someone in a way that actually helps them become more independent. So the classic example is if you're downtown and you see a homeless person with a bottle of Thunderbird in their hand, you don't give them money because you understand the money is going to go to purchase alcohol and drugs. But to be beneficent, you might go to a restaurant and bring them a hamburger. So one of those enables something that is harmful to the person, and one of them is comparatively helpful. With your child, for example, I have so many of these examples because I have to deal with them all the time, but I'll just pick one out of the top of my head. If you're calling your child up every day to remind her to take birth control, that's enabling. What you should do is help the person get on a birth control that is more reliable and doesn't require daily oral pills. That's beneficent because the goal is the same. You don't want to have a pregnancy. But how you go about that matters. And so are you making the person more independent by getting them on a reliable method, or are you making them more dependent by you being their alarm clock? That could be true about waking people up. Do you call them up in the morning every morning, or do you make them set up one of the magic alarm clocks that like explodes in the room and parts go everywhere and you have to put them together or something in order to make the alarm shut off? Everything you do needs to produce greater independence. If you give your young adult money, that money should not be to bail them out of jail. Honestly, that's enabling. I know that's hard for people to hear. It is. It's enabling. Unless they went to jail for something that genuinely isn't their fault. If you give your child money to pay for a semester of CNA classes with the agreement that if they fail the classes, they'll pay you back, that's beneficent, even if they've had some problems in the past with school. Every decision you want to make between enabling, more dependent, beneficent, less dependent. And that sounds super easy and fun when I'm sitting here talking about it. I am very aware it's excruciating and difficult, and the worse the situation is for a young adult, the harder it is for the parent, because the parent becomes scared that the child will become self-harmful or end up homeless or whatever, and that makes them immobilized and more prone to enabling. So there's the short answer to a very complex
Very tough question, I know. For every parent wrestles with that
Yes.
one. But I think that was helpful to distinguish between the cleaning the child's room is a pretty clear example.
Yeah.
There are a number of participants in the webinar who are posting who are in fact young adults. Alex, Andrew, Brittany, I can see the names here, who are people who are here because they're in many ways they're terrified. They have had a difficult first year in college. They're living at home. They're not sure what to do, and they're really looking for help. Figuring out what the next step is. And in one case, it's a mother Lisa, who's son is very unmotivated, very introverted, staying home. So they're really, another looking for what to do next. I think, by the way, all of you, dialing into this webinar was a good first step. So Congratulations for that. But what do you think, Dr. Wes?
Okay, so of course you did a good job of giving that sort of survey of how young people are, and then each specific is a little complex. I'll give you kind of the overview answer. First of all, by all means, I would love to have you buy my book and write beautiful things about it on Amazon. I did write it for exactly that situation, and you don't even have to read the whole book because I have each chapter set up with a little checklist that asks, is this book for me, or is this chapter for me? And if it's not, you don't need to know anything about being honest. If you're good at that, ignore that chapter. So you can go just to what you need to look at. The next thing I really think is important, and whether you call it a mentor, a coach, or a therapist, I work in a university town. I also have an office in Kansas City. I see a lot of young adults in the situation these folks are describing and the mom is describing. I see it every day. And it takes a very strong team effort to salvage young people at this point. And you have to overcome not only the ADD, but the depression that follows it. If you have ADD and you're in the situation these young people are talking about and you're not depressed, you don't understand your situation very well. These young people do. From what you're saying, they get it. It's frustrating. So the first thing I would do is get out, find the mentor or the therapist, and you want to find a therapist who actually does this work, who is compassionate for people with ADD. There are still people out there who don't, quote, believe in ADD like it's, faith-based or something. You don't want to talk to those people. The people who do this, who understand the transitional process, understand the difficulties, know how to work effectively with medicine. You want a therapist that knows medicine inside out, because you're going to have 6 minutes to talk to a psychiatrist or a physician and hours to talk to the therapist. And the therapist can help mediate some of those problems, because medicine it's a love-hate relationship. It's important, but it's hard to tolerate and manage sometimes without some support. So the next thing I would do then with that therapist, I would have some very targeted goals. And my personal preference, and I think you'll see this in the book, my preference for therapists is they need to be sort of like gunny sergeants in the military. I very rarely lose clients, and I'm pretty tough. And a therapist who can sit you down and say, we have got to work on this one thing. You have to focus on this today, and really be strong that way. I think your money is better spent in that situation. And then you set these specific goals. You have about one large goal, which may be moving out. Well, I'm going to hold off on that one because that one's actually harder. The large goal may be, I will get a trade degree in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, or I will decide which career I can do, or I will get through the first semester of college, or I will hold a job for more than 6 weeks. Whatever it is, that's the first goal. And then you figure out, what are the obstacles, what do I need to do to make this happen? And it's always these dumb little things like, and you all know what I'm talking about. It's like the getting out of bed, or the, am I staying up too late, or video games are sucking the life out of my soul, or whatever it may be. How are we going to explicitly deal with that? And then it becomes a matter of discipline. And I don't know what I don't know if all other therapists do this, but I do run a pretty strong traffic through text messaging. I think there is, as long as the agreement is signed for consent to do texting, because it does open up the possibility of confidentiality breaches if you're not keeping your phone safe. That is a helpful tool, because then you text your therapist or your mentor and you're like, I'm standing here thinking about going out with my ex-boyfriend again. What do you think I ought to do? And just hesitating long enough to make that text and write it out and look at it helps interdict some of those decisions before you make them. And it's always the little decisions that you don't see them coming, and they get you. So that's just a very brief overview, but the number one thing is do not hesitate to find somebody to work with you on this and work on the right issues. And it better feel like you're in the boot camp, because that's what's going to save you.
That's really interesting. So find someone who's tough but supportive, understands the situation, but work on clear, definable goals and go after them. You know, how do people find, it's just hard to find a therapist that's as good as you are.
Well, you're so nice, Susan. Please come and
really,
let's have lunch. So
I'm not the only, everyone's posting, well, how do I find someone? My son's 6 hours away from Dr. West. What do I do? So, yeah, I mean, I think.
The bad news is, I'm going to answer that question, but the 6-hour person, the bad news is I do have people driving in from St. Louis at this point and other areas all over the Midwest to see us here. And I appreciate that, but I totally don't think that solves the problem at all. I agree with you. I'll give you my overview of this. First of all, you look at their presentation online, and most people who are, it's kind of an odd correlation, but most people that are up to date with the training and the literature and understand how to work with young people are also social media savvy. They're going to have stuff on their website that makes sense to you and you can connect with. And then look at that first. If you have friends who have been treated for this, ask them. I get more personal referrals than I can handle because they get too many people in a friendship group and you get conflicts of interest. So I have associates and I have people in my practice. We can split up cases. But other than that little problem, if somebody likes their therapist a lot and talks about their therapist a lot, that's probably somebody that would be worth going to. Occasionally, but not often, your physician will know somebody that's good. The problem is physicians don't really know therapists closely enough to necessarily make a recommendation. But then the next thing you got to do is, you know, buyer beware. And you go in and normally therapists won't do free consultations. Honestly, if a therapist does a free consultation, they probably are more needy for business than you want to risk. But if you'll go in and spend the hour, if I find that someone is not a good match for me in the first hour, then I won't charge them for the session. I don't know how everybody else does it. But if you go in, you meet with somebody, and you're going to either feel like you have a connection with that person based on how your personalities match, or you won't. And you may have to try that 2 or 3 times. And it's worth it, because I have people, I kid you not, that I've seen on and off for 10, 12 years. They're in their mid to late 20s now. Kids I started seeing when they were in junior high. Now, no, I'm not seeing them every week. I'm seeing them whenever they need to be seen. We may go 2 or 3 years and not see each other. But that relationship is strong enough that it comes back when it's needed. And that's what you're shooting for. And it's not as difficult as you might think. It just takes some work, like everything else in life. It takes some work to get to know somebody and figure out, sort of like dating, you know, do we match? Or is this person well suited for me? And once you find that, then it makes for a pretty good relationship. But it's doable, especially if you're in a little bit larger metro area or you're 60 or 70 miles from one. When you're out in the rural hinterlands, it's trickier.
The idea of trying them out reminds me of something. And let me run this by you. A friend of mine who has a daughter with ADHD who was having a lot of problems in college, social and others. What she did is she interviewed, I don't know how many different coaches, therapists, and then she selected 3, and then she asked her daughter to meet with each one of them and make her own selection.
Yeah.
And that seemed to have worked well in that case, because the daughter didn't have to go through the whole experience of identifying the whole universe, but yet she selected the person. And in fact, they're still, as much as you described it in this case, she's still seeing the therapist that she chose, many years later. So
that's a great example.
Trying it out seems like a good idea.
That is a great example. It reminds me of a couple things to warn parents about. First of all, the awesomeness of a therapist in the eyes of a teen isn't always the way it is for the adult. So who an adult sees as the awesome therapist may not be who the teen does. So the idea of the teen and young adult must be very much in that choice. Now, I will say, I believe you can make a teen go to therapy. I don't believe you can keep them there, but you can make them go. And 9 out of 10 times, more than that really, probably 95 out of 100, if a parent can get a teen to come see me, the teen will ask to come back. And that is a good sign. They may not want to be there to be with. In fact, kids still tease me about how much they hated me for the first 20 minutes of the session, and these are people I've seen for years. So it's okay to push your kid to go once. Say, give it a couple of chances, see what you think. That's all I'm asking. So that, again, we're back to making things less scary than they may be. Then the second thing is, I generally do not think it is a good idea for parents to go screen therapists ahead of time. This upsets kids so much. They feel like you've flown over that territory and bombed it already. And so I usually will do a little email exchange with a parent to let them know where I'm at. I've got so much on my website they can get to know me. I'm on the radio. People know me. So be careful doing recon, because kids don't like that. Kids are smart enough to do their own recon, and if you go in together, they will figure it out. But the idea of trying to pick a universe of 3 or 4 to start with, great idea. I don't have any problem with that, as long as the parent doesn't accidentally bomb the territory.
That makes sense. Yeah, you don't want your child to feel like this is a fake option. It's,
Exactly.
You really want it to be a real option.
Yeah, they're super smart. They catch you doing that stuff every time.
Right. In terms of finding therapists in general, I would just volunteer to the group that this has come up before. And oftentimes we refer people to CHAD, wonderful support group, nationwide support group. And also on ADD Connect, which is the website of the social media website of the community of Attitude Mag. Lots of people are exchanging ideas, and so I think, as you said, Wes, reaching out to other people and asking them what worked for them.
It's a very helpful resource.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about careers? A couple of people are asking about what major should they choose. Others are saying, how can I help my child pick a career when they have so many interests they don't know where to start? When we were talking before the webinar, you mentioned something about pairing, which I thought was fascinating. Yeah. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how to help narrow down your interests or become more practical if you're the optimistic kid.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, okay, so it is, each of those 3 categories has its own career selection struggles. And in general, something I've recently come to realize through writing the newspaper column is that the passion for work and career in college is not lacking, even amongst the ADD people. They will have a great wish, a great passion for something. It's the practicality that's tricky. So I talk about this a lot in the book, and I'll give you a few of the top-end pointers. Pointer 1 is Google U.S. Department of Labor and then add anything from dog catcher to pediatrician. That will take you directly to the best statistics on the present and future of that career. And it'll tell you if it's going to be a growth career or a decline career or a flat career. That's one thing to start with for the overall career selection. The second thing is to figure out whether you are an introverted or extroverted person, wholly apart from the ADD. That is a normally distributed thing in the population. There's nothing wrong with being introverted, nothing wrong with being extroverted. But there are certain careers like accounting that are really good for introverted people, and sales, which is really good for extroverted people. And you want to look at those lists. You can find them online and kind of think, where do I fit? A lot of my kids like to take the Myers-Briggs or the Kiersey-Bates or one of those things that gives you the test of whether you're an INTF or, one of those categories. Those are actually pretty neat. Like I say in the book, it beats the heck out of a horoscope. It'll tell you a lot more about your personality. Then there's this thing you alluded to, Susan, about pairing, and I'm going to just use my daughter as an example because she can't hear us, and I can do whatever I want with my daughter here on the air. But she was very interested in museum curation. She's 17. She's very interested in libraries. She's very interested in Broadway. Well, these are all terrible careers. Ask any librarian. They're difficult positions to find. There are tons of people coming out of library programs. We have an excellent one here just down the road, master's degree, nationally known. People have a terrible time getting jobs. One of the advantages in doing this job is I get to see all that firsthand. So I told her, why don't you go into accounting? And she's like, what does that have to do with museums? And I said, you would be able to run the museum as a business person and get into acquisitions and curation. Well, she, thought I was a little skeptical about this, but she went ahead and took accounting in high school and thought it was okay. She was surprised. So I was on the website of the Field Museum. Those of you in Chicago are familiar with it, internationally famous natural history museum. And I was looking for an internship for a client of mine as a biology major. And there were 4 listings for accountants at the time at the Field Museum. Well, that really sold her, because once you get in there, you're doing the business part of this, and every museum is a business. So that's an example of, she will now get a degree in accounting and probably a degree in history or museum studies. One of those is her passion, and one of them is a practical solution for how to get money out of your passion. So if you're going to go into art, you better go into business or some combination. Right now, if you're going into the law, that's not a great career choice. So you want to combine that with chemistry or geology or something that is really in high demand right now. Geology is in very high demand because we're fracking everybody to death now, and that's very popular. So, and by the way, environmental correction is probably going to be pretty hot because of the damage that's done. So you want to look at that, and you have to think about career not just from passion, but from a practical standpoint. Every teenage boy I meet wants to be a video game programmer. Well, there's about 100 reasons why that's not a very viable business right now. Partly because it's no demand, and because so many people want to do it, and it's also going out like the publishing industry is, to where it's self-monetized. It's an entrepreneur business. So people, if they want to do that as a hobby, they might make it big and write an app and get rich. But while you're at it, you've got to be doing something over here maybe in business, so that you have the ability to manage your affairs. That I have tons of those examples, but that's what pairing is about. Go ahead with your passion. Also find something practical to pair it with.
Seems like really good advice, regardless of ADHD or not.
It is, yeah.
How about managing daily life as a young adult? A couple of people are talking about helping manage their finances. Someone else who is managing her career okay can't seem to managing the household and having a social life. How do you manage the pieces when any one piece can be so difficult?
Yeah, in chapter 10 of my book, I say that the secret of happiness is how you organize your life. And I really would stick to that. And I don't just mean you know where your socks are. I mean, all those things you just mentioned kind of go together in the flow. And for some people, that's just a natural experience. And we hate all those people. We don't even want them to be in the show with us today. But the people like us, the normal folks, and folks with ADD especially, have to work harder at managing their time and their daily life. And so depending on the specific, each one of those has special workarounds that you use. Calendaring, in my opinion, is the most important thing, short of getting out of bed, the most important thing you can do every day. Because in calendaring, you can budget your time for the study time we talked about, for romance, for, I have on here that I'm meeting with my young adult editors on my novel on Thursday morning, and I have a date with my wife, and my daughter and I are going to a play at the university on Saturday, and I've got a radio interview Saturday afternoon. I know what I'm doing all the time, and some people find that lame and boring. In my version of reality, that's liberating and freeing for me, because then I just can do what I'm going to do. That's how time can be best managed. If you're having like social life, you can calendar social life just like I described, so that you are spending the right amount of time with friends. I would calendar video games. I know that's come up like 80 times. I'm just really frustrated with video games right now. I would calendar that in, my 2 hours of screen time a day, and then I'm done when I'm done. I calendar riding Rock and Roller Coaster when we go to Disney World, and we get to ride everything at Disney World because we plan our time effectively that way. in terms of finding things and personal organization, Susan Pinsky's book about organization for ADD people is great. She wrote the foreword in my book, and even if she hadn't written the foreword, I would tell you that was a great book. I would definitely use it. She's kind of the boot camp
What's the name of her book?
Oh, it's called...
What is the name of her?
It's on my website, on the online store, and I think it's called Organizational... Well, her website is organizationallyyours.com, and I think it's called Organizing for People with ADHD. I think that's the name of the book. It's real straightforward.
Okay. That's Susan Pinsky.
Yeah, my clients love that book.
That's great. Here's a question for you. If you could communicate any 3 pieces of advice to an ADHD person, ADD or ADHD, around age 20, that person must follow, what would this advice be and why? From Becky.
Yeah.
Conclusion.
What a good one. Well, I have 13 pieces of that advice in the book, 13 principles. At the top of the list is you've got to be where you are here and now and exist here and learn to love it in order to ever be somewhere else. People are always, the reason the book's called I Always Want to Be Where I'm Not is because that's the sense of restlessness that comes with ADD. And you've got to live here and now. And I guess my second piece of advice is you have to live intentionally. Think before you act. The best thing you could probably do, in addition to what we've talked about already, is get into some kind of a practice of meditation. And boy, if you knew me, you would chuckle because I'm about the least meditative person you're going to meet. But it can be, there's another book I like called Meditation for Non-Meditators. This is a person from Kansas City. I met her on TV the other day, and it's how to meditate in 5 minutes. Now, what could be more perfect for people with ADD than that? And what I think of with meditation is probably different. Like sitting down before you go somewhere, you're in the car, you turn on the air conditioner, just sit there for a second and think, what am I doing right now? What do I want to do? Where am I going? Do I have what I need? That's meditation. It's not like just thinking about the Buddha. It's stop, pause, think, what am I doing? What do I mean to be doing? And one of my things I get after young folks for is they'll say, well, I didn't mean to do it. I don't care what you didn't mean to do. I care what you do mean to do. And so that's what being intentional is about. That's the core of meditation, is to be intentional. Choose what you're going to do and make sure every act is a deliberate act. So now I think that's 2, and then probably learn that the secret of happiness is how to organize your life. That seems pretty important too.
Okay. Sounds like mindfulness is, you're calling it meditation.
Yes.
But,
yes.
I can't tell you the number of speakers on the Attitude webinar series who recommend mindfulness. Everyone from physicians to all kinds of people just really say it's the key to really sort of stopping and being aware of where you are, what you're thinking, what you're doing. So
it's very true because it's the antithesis of what your brain is wired to do, and that is to be impulsive and to act before thinking. And I got to be honest, I do not believe that alone will do it. But when you combine that with all these other things, which is why it's like basically chapter 2 in the book, it's critical, but it's insufficient. And you have to pull all those things together. Finding other things, finding a good prescriber that you can really work with as a team with your therapist, you and the prescriber. That needs to be, I could go on for another hour about that. That needs to be a much better team effort than what sometimes we see in the field.
Okay. Wes Crenshaw, thank you so much. We could talk for another hour, and I hope you'll come back. Just so much great practical advice. Folks, Wes' book, published in May, I Always Want to Be Where I'm Not, Successful Living with ADD and ADHD. Thank you again so much, and thanks everyone for being with us today.
And thank you for having me, Susan. It's been terrific.
Hi, everyone.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.
Shopify helps you sell at every stage of your business. Like that, let's put it online and see what happens stage.
And the site is live.
That we opened a store and need a fast checkout stage.
Thanks. You're all set.
That count it up and ship it around the globe stage.
This one's going to Thailand.
And that, wait, did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Whatever your stage, businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial at shopify.com/listen.